it is time now for us to talk about what is a gimmick and how important is a gimmick in professional wrestling. Now, a gimmick could be a couple of things. Now, a gimmick could be something you pull out and hit a guy with. I hit the guy, do you have your gimmick? But that's not what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about a gimmick, something to get the fans. How important, Jack, is it to have a gimmick?
I think it's extremely important. I mean, it's memorable. It's something people latch on to. You remember your heroes, your comic book heroes, your Supermans, your Batmans. Those were gimmicks. Bruce Wayne wasn't very exciting. Clark Kent wasn't very exciting. But once they put those costumes on, they became those characters, those gimmicks. Then people got behind them and wanted to follow everything they did. And it's the same thing with wrestling. We're superheroes. We're supervillains. We're everything in spandex that your heroes are. So those characters. Undertaker is, I think, your prime example of a great gimmick lasting for 30-something years and still being meaningful in this industry. Steve Austin was a gimmick. Now, it was true to who he was, but it was still a gimmick. It was him with the volume turned up, which is probably the most true things that anybody can do to get a gimmick over, is it's got to be you with the volume turned up. Adrian Street's another one. In real life, he's not quite as flamboyant, but he's very flamboyant. So, the character was just huge. So gimmicks are huge in getting people's attention and keeping them in your memory when you go home after the show.
Rodney?
Well, think about it. Some people's just their look is their gimmick, such as Tony Atlas. I mean, let's just be honest. That tremendous condition he was in was what sold him, really. Then his ability to also connect with the fans. You look behind your head there. You have Ric Flair, one of the great gimmicks of all times. You have to, you bleach your hair. You get Olivia to make some great robes for you. Not to say he wasn't a great talent. He was a great talent, but he worked that gimmick. Missing Link was another one. Wally McDaniels, another one. Wrestling 2. Dick Slater was more, he really didn't have a gimmick per se, but he did. He was the ultimate wrestler. He was the ultimate
Mr. Unpredictable.
Right. So, I mean,
his style became his gimmick.
And then there was those obnoxious ones like Kevin Sullivan and his devil worshipping and whatever he was doing, talking about the Tree of Woe, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, Buzz Sawyer, who we saw progress from Buzz Sawyer, the wrestler, into the Mad Dog. And those are things that worked up over the years. One of the best that I've seen talk about that was Billy Graham, who started off just with muscles, basically a different look than what anybody else had. But then over the years he developed and became the superstar Billy Graham, the WWF champion, and just a tremendous star that not just that many emulated, such as Hulk Hogan, Austin Idol, Jesse Ventura, all emulated Billy Graham.
Well, it is incredible. Like someone like Wrestling 2, which had a little bit of success as Johnny Walker, but when he dons the mask on and becomes Mr. Wrestling 2, he's remembered for that to this day. It's very important. And then he changed a little bit of what he did. He had the little dance that he would do before you would hit the, again, that is part of his gimmick. That is part of what he did. The knee lift was part of the gimmick that Wrestling 2 was. Dusty Rhodes, the bionic elbow. Again, Dusty was kind of just exactly like that in the dressing room. But when he went out there, he was larger than life. I thought Dusty Rhodes wrestling Stan Hansen. Look at him, a cowboy basically. Stan Hansen wasn't a cowboy. He didn't ride out in the range or nothing. But the man was believable in that. Big man from Borger, Texas. And I think that I guess this is the question. Does people have gimmicks today? Is there gimmicks in wrestling today?
I don't. Yeah, you do. You have them. Drew McIntyre. They've put more of a gimmick on him lately. He's coming out the kilt and bringing the sword out. And going back to that heritage, Irish heritage that he has. And but I don't. You're not investing in those gimmicks now because it seems like they change them out too fast. If Vince doesn't think they're getting over, or whoever, whatever company you're with, if they don't get over real quick, then they just ditch them and they come up with something else. Back in our day, you got something and you built it and you kept building it.
Yes. Yeah. And lots of this stuff that was not contrived by the company. The wrestlers developed them over the years, and you might work for Vern Gagne, who will give you a little bit, and then you go out work in California, and they give you a little bit more. And you go back to Eddie, you go to Eddie Graham, and he develops even more. And so it's an ongoing development. Tommy Rich starts with Jarrett and has that raw ability, but then when he comes to Georgia, it just gets better and better.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he comes out of his shell once he comes to Georgia. We were talking about like Ole Anderson. Really, there's not a gimmick there. He's just mean. All right, there really wasn't. But then you had somebody like King Kong Mosca, just huge, 320 pounds, all muscle. I thought when he was the champion in Georgia, I thought he never was going to be beat. I mean, he was running over everybody, and it was a shock the night Wrestling 2 beat him. And I asked Daddy, well, how did he beat him? With a knee lift. Just awesome stuff. And then there's some great gimmicks like we know of, the Shockmaster, one of the best that's ever been. People were even today, WWE would like to create the next Shockmaster.
Well, let's be honest. Not everyone can pull off a gimmick. Kevin Nash did better when he had no gimmick. Vinny Vegas didn't work for him. The Odds certainly didn't work for him. The Master Blaster didn't work for him. But just make him Kevin Nash. Let him be himself. And then he gets over it. I mean, he did for 2 years anyway. Now, I don't know if he got over for as long as Wrestling 2 or Dick Slater or Dusty Rhodes did. But
that was again, he wasn't developing himself. The company was.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between doing it yourself and having somebody do it for you or try to do
it.
And
let's remember, he was embroiled in one of the biggest angles of the 90s, with the NWA. So, he probably could have gone around with a pacifier in his mouth and still got a lot of response off of it.
That is the next gimmick for WWE, pacifier in the mouth.
Crap, I should have kept my mouth shut.
That's leading up to the baby bottle matches.
If they have another bald-headed guy that smokes cigars, I'm suing.
It's funny because I think that you look at Don Jardine. He starts out his career wrestling as Don Jardine, big old guy, puts a mask on, calls himself the mask puller, uses the claw, which I'm going to be honest with you, the mask themselves was scary. He was a scary individual when he come to the ring. He was huge, but he went from Don Jardine to the Spuller and made a fortune in that. And really
the Super Destroyer as well.
Yeah, and the Carolinas. I mean, the guy would just he couldn't make it as Don Jardine, so he had to find a gimmick, and he found mask gimmicks that really made him truly. You look at Bill Eadie as the masked superstar. Before he had wrestled as one of the Bongos. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that wasn't, but it wasn't as successful as when he became the masked superstar. And I don't even know if Demolition was as it was a gimmick. Was it as successful as the masked superstar?
No, I don't think so. Well, it was successful. If you didn't know him as the masked superstar, Axe was a great gimmick. But for those of us who remember both, then Superstar is the epitome. of what he did in his career.
So there's always been gimmicks in wrestling. There's always been,
the hillbillies. I like the hillbillies. The hillbillies.
Yeah, I mean, the Mask Infernos. Think of, and their gimmick was not only having a mask, but it was J.C. Dykes was part of their gimmick, because without him, he did the canteen, he did the whistle, and then people would bring whistles in the building, because they say he would use the whistle to tell the guys what to do, so the fans would bring whistles in, so it would mess up their whole match. Things like that. It's a lost. I think when you watch wrestling today, there's a lost art in the art of storytelling and how they used to tell a story and the continuous weeks of that story. It is lost, and but there's some good stuff out there. I just recently watched a show, and when we talk about gimmicks, Jay Lethal. Have you ever seen him, Rodney? You ever seen him wrestle, Jay Lethal?
I don't think so.
Jack, have you seen him wrestle?
Oh, yeah.
He's a very good wrestler. And they did a gimmick one time where he was Ric Flair. He came out on television as Ric Flair. He did the interview, and he sounded just like Ric Flair. A great gimmick for him. I think he might have also did the same thing with Randy Savage. He must have been able to do voices very well. He must have been able to do anybody's voice. But that was a gimmick that if they would have went somewhere with it, I think they could have really got Jay Lethal over. For some reason, Impact Wrestling had a hard time getting people over. I don't know why, but they couldn't get anybody over. Guys, is there anything else we need to talk about the gimmick and how important it is professional wrestling?
Well, I'll add real quick my story about wrestling too. Is I talked with him one night, because Stu was renowned for, even in the dressing room, he never took his mask off. I worked with him for years off and on different places, never saw him without his mask until after he retired. And I asked him in the dressing room one night, I said, why is it that you never take your mask off? And he said, I can't take the chance of somebody seeing me. He said, because Johnny Walker wasn't anybody. He said, but Mr. Wrestling too is somebody, and I have to protect that. So, those gimmicks, it changed his life. Yeah. And he took care of it. He took care of that gimmick.